good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this forum. This forum is sponsored by the Advisory Commission on Policing for Montgomery County, also known as the ACP. The ACP provides guidance and recommendations to the council about policing, and that we must hold at least one public forum a year to gather input on policing. And so for this forum, we have chosen to discuss the police department's new consent search policy. This is a Zoom webinar, and participants have been given the opportunity to submit questions in advance, and we have received your questions. Thank you very much. These questions have also been distributed to the panelists to prepare to give thoughtful responses. If you have new questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, and panelists will answer them if there is time. If your question is a simple fact-based question like, what's the new consent search policy, we can post links in the chat. For subjective questions, the panelists will give an answer. If we need to follow up, or if we don't get to all the questions, we will gather them and submit them to the appropriate panelists for answers. And these answers will eventually be posted on the ACP's website. At this time, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists for tonight. We have Councilman Vice President Will Jawando, Public Safety Committee Chair Sidney Katz, State's Attorney John McCarthy, and our new Police Chief, Mark Yamada. We thank you so much for joining us this evening. And at this time, we will turn it over to you for opening comments, starting with Council Vice President Jawando.
So I'm afraid Council Vice President Jawando is running a little bit late. I was wondering if we could turn it over to Public Safety Chair Sidney Katz to begin.
Well, thank you, and good evening. I am Sidney Katz, and I'm chair of the Council's Public Safety Committee. And thank you for inviting us this evening. As a committee, we have engaged in extensive discussions regarding consent searches and the critical balance needed to protect our residents' rights while our officers effectively do their jobs. Over the years, our police department has made deliberate efforts to make traffic stops less intrusive, and they have continued to refine these efforts with the implementation of their new consent search policy that took effect this past December. It is important to recognize that having a different standard for consent searches in Montgomery County compared to other law enforcement agencies also within the county could lead to public confusion. We have 4 municipalities with their own police departments, as well as the state police and the Maryland National Capital Park Police. I believe that Montgomery County Police Department has done commendable work in updating their policy to address community concerns while also incorporating technology that aids officers in the process. One of the most significant updates is the mandatory review of body-worn camera footage for every consent search. This requirement ensures greater oversight and transparency, benefiting both the motorist and officer involved. Additionally, the Administrative Charging Committee provides another layer of accountability around police reform. This independent civilian body reviews complaints regarding officers from community members. According to the annual report through 2024, it is notable that the committee has not received any complaints related to consent searches. Consent searches are an essential tool for our police to investigate potential criminal activity and enhance public safety. The Public Safety Committee plans to follow up with a briefing on implementation of the policy after budget. where we will get an update on its use, effectiveness, and data collection efforts. Thank you, and I will turn it over to State's Attorney John McCarthy, unless Council Vice President Jawando is on. We go to Council Vice President Jawando and then John McCarthy?
Yes, please.
Council Vice President Jawando.
Thank you, Council Member and Chair Katz. I was stuck in the non-panelist room, so I had to get the right link so I heard everybody, but I wasn't there. So good to be with you tonight, and thank you to the ACP for hosting this very important town hall and session, and appreciate my colleague and friend Councilmember Katz and all our chief Yamada and all of those who are here, State's Attorney McCarthy, and the entire MCPD team and our council staff as well, Ms. Farag and team. Thank you for having me. I'm an at-large member of the council, as you all know, represent all 1 million plus residents. I chair education and culture, and I'm a member of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. And I also was the author of these bills relating to consent search changes. First the STEP Act, and then the Freedom to Leave Act, and really appreciate the progress we've made. And I'll say progress, I don't think we're there yet, but by nature of the term, progress means you're moving towards the right direction. And I think that's a thing we're always trying to do here in Montgomery County. I also want to just acknowledge, I know everyone's dealing with a lot right now, given the changes and uncertainty at the federal level, whether it be loss of jobs or contractors. There's a lot of anxiety. And every time I'm on a call like this, I just want to make sure you know the council's sponsoring a series of webinars to support our federal workers, their families, and to help deal with those issues. And we'll make sure that we get all that information to you either in the chat or as a follow-up. The next one, my office is hosting on March 19th. It's going to focus on the court cases. We're going to have Attorney General Brown. And please reach out to our offices if you need help, and because we know this is a tough time. Turning to the topic of tonight, I want to again thank Chief Yamada and his team. I want to thank Lee Holland and the police union for their collaboration to update the consent search policy. You often hear the chicken or the egg. I won't say who started what, but I'm glad that this conversation is happening and it's ongoing, and that we are moving in the direction that acknowledges the balancing of the need to make sure all community members feel safe and protected, while law enforcement can do the job that they're charged to do to keep us all safe and protected. It's not going to be foreign to the ACP, but some of the community members know I presented a lot of data, and both national and local data that shows that consent searches tend to be among the least fruitful as far as producing contraband or weapons or drugs, and then disproportionately used for communities of color, particularly the African-American community. We had very harrowing testimony on when we had the Freedom to Leave and both the STEP Act of a lot of people coming forward and sharing their experiences of being searched when they knew they had done nothing wrong, and how that impacted them in a very detrimental way, and as far as demoralizing and scaring them and not feeling that they were protected. At the same time, we know we have to do a lot in our community to keep our community safe and keep drugs and guns off of our streets. And there's a way to do both in a way that protects the constitutional rights and the freedom to not be searched if there is not probable cause or reasonable articulable suspicion. And that's what we're trying to do with this policy. So I do think that this is a step in the right direction. There is, for example, some work to be done, I think, around some of the language in the policy. We had a discussion at the Public Safety Committee a few months ago. The current new policy says an officer should have reasonable articulable suspicion to request a consent search instead of must have. That's something where I think we might want to hear from folks, again, knowing that this standard is the standard that we're all saying that we hope to have is that that there must be that reasonable articulable suspicion that there is a crime happening or that there is some illegal contraband before the question is asked, can I search your vehicle or your person? But what we've had and what the policy has come out is a step in the right direction. As Chair Katz mentioned, I look forward to monitoring this because you can put the things on paper and you can train against it, but you have to see how you're doing and what the data looks like. And so I look forward to coming back and getting an update at the Public Safety Committee and for the council in a few months and after we get through the budget season to see how this is working and if other tweaks need to be made. But I do want to end where I started in thanking everyone involved for moving this forward in a positive direction and working collaboratively to balance the needs of protecting every member of our community and making sure that folks feel respected and can exercise their rights without fear of intimidation or anything of the like. So I'll turn it now to, I think since Councilmember Katz went, I'll turn it over to State's Attorney.
Thank you, Will. My name is John McCarthy. I'm the State's Attorney for Montgomery County. I just want to echo, I think that we have been dedicated for a very long time ensuring that the constitutional legal rights of citizens in the community are respected. One of the things I did when I first became State's Attorney, and I've been doing this for years, is I have an instructor, a law school graduate. Right now, the person teaching at the police academy on constitutional law, search and seizure is a retired circuit court judge who also is a professor at American University Law School, and he has been teaching at the law school for 20 years. We are dedicated to protecting the constitutional legal rights of all the citizens that live in this community. I would also just indicate, because balancing, and again, I think all of these issues that we discuss as a community, we're trying to balance the protection of individual rights and the safety in the community. I know that Councilman Jawanda just a minute ago talked about, because I think we recognize 80% of the guns that are removed the last full calendar year that were taken off the streets in Montgomery County were taken as a result of consent searches of cars. So to a certain extent, there is an issue about less consent searches. You're going to yield less guns. I will say to you, the guns that we seize that are legally in possession are disproportionately in the hands of prohibited persons and underage minors who have these guns in violation of Maryland law. I also indicate that when you study criminology and study effects of violence in a community, gun reduction is something that actually works to reduce crime and violence in a community. I would indicate to you, I'm a strong supporter. We were the first large major jurisdiction to put cameras on basically every officer that's in the street. We've got about 2,000 cameras on the street. I think they're at 9 different departments. Maybe Chief Yamada can correct me because he has a board that gets together with all of the departments all the time. But we have about 2,000 cameras on the street. And I'm a strong proponent of that because we see and hear everything that happens in an interaction between a Montgomery County police officer, or for that matter, almost all of the departments have these cameras. Do we devote, besides giving these cameras to our officers, do we internally in my office review the camera? I've got 11 full-time employees. All they do is look at body camera footage. In addition to their review and going through that body camera footage, they also are looking at every single arrest. So if you've got a seizure, you've got a search that occurs in any context involving a Montgomery County officer and nearly any other officer in this county, you're going to see exactly what was said and done. I'm very much in favor of that kind of transparency. I would indicate to you, because this was a question that came up the last time, what kind of feedback are you getting either from your lawyers or let's say judges in particular? I'm going to tell you, I have never had a complaint where a judge came to me or a member of my staff pointing out problems with the way the searches were conducted. I would indicate, I think someone else mentioned this earlier, that there had not been a single complaint related to consent searches that has been made with the body that's organized this particular meeting tonight. There is constitutional law that has always protected the right of an individual to say no if they are requested to allow a consent search. A consent search must be voluntary and not coerced. We now have video proof of what was said and done now in Montgomery County. I will tell you, looking at the policy, just to tell you again, for those who worked on this policy, there are many things that are done, and Will, in some measure, this is a result of your prodding on this particular issue and your advocacy on this issue. There's a lot in this policy that goes beyond what the Constitution requires. The fact that you should have reasonable, articulable suspicion to request a consent search, that's in this policy. I'm giving you examples of things that are in the policy that would not otherwise be required under the Constitution unless you made this a requirement. I think maybe Councilman Katz mentioned earlier that because we have different departments, we are going to have a hodgepodge of different disagreements. Montgomery County operating under this, but maybe the state police not, maybe not Rockville City, maybe not Gaithersburg, maybe not Tacoma Park. These are different policies. Articulable suspicion, not constitutional. The fact that it has to be recorded on body, we are going to see it. It has to be recorded on the body worn camera. That's not a constitutional requirement. That's a policy requirement. You have to advise a person under this policy that they can say no. Constitutionally, you know, I think a lot of people know about Miranda and you have a right to remain silent and that kind of thing. When it comes to consent searches, we are adding in sort of a Miranda type protection that did not exist. The person has to acknowledge on the video camera that they were told of their rights not to say yes. There are a number of things here that were done. And I guess this is, I'm going to end it. I'm going to turn it over to the chief. But I think there were a number of things that were written into this policy to give added protections to the individuals that are stopped and ask for consent here in the community so we can see, document, and know what happened. And so I thank all the people that worked on this. And I'll turn it over now to Chief Yamada and his staff, who were the chief architects of this policy.
So thanks, John. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to take that as a yes. Appreciate the invitation to speak tonight. Myself, I have with me Assistant Chief Darren Frank, who used to oversee the Management Services Bureau, who was in charge of formulating and then implementing these policy changes and the new app that goes along with it. I also have Darren is now in charge of the Patrol Services Bureau, which most of these searches originate from. I also have Assistant Chief Nick Augustine, who has taken over Darren's place in the Management Services Bureau and will monitor this program moving forward. And I also brought on Assistant Chief Dave McBain, who used to be the commander of the 3rd District, where a lot of these searches take place, to speak to some of the aspects of what he saw down there as a district commander. So let me just get historical here for a minute. So dating back to 2004, the Montgomery County Department of Police consent search policy has been far more restrictive than the law requires, as John had said, and what the Supreme Court has found to be constitutional and admissible in court. During the past 20 years, however, Montgomery County Police Department has never stopped listening to concerns and has continued to add additional restrictions and requirements through direct guidance from our executives, from the chief of police, and through policy changes, all of which affects our officers. This predates me, it predates Chief Jones before me, and even goes back to the beginning of Chief Manger's tenure, as I said, as far back as 2004. So we're talking over a 20-year span. Keep in mind that these policies and these changes and these questions only apply to Montgomery County Police Department officers, not any other law enforcement agency nationally or our municipal partners. Gaithersburg City, Rockville City, Chevy Chase Village, Tacoma Park, as also John pointed out. The county executive, an overwhelming number of the county council, numerous civic and community groups, and the Supreme Court have all agreed that consent searches are a valuable tool for law enforcement when used constitutionally. I recently mandated that officers, before they, I recently mandated that a police supervisor and an executive review every consent search related to traffic stops. According to our policy, every interaction, as John said, must be recorded on our body cameras. The state's attorney's office, as John also pointed out, has had no issues. Nothing was brought up to them by a judge or one of John's attorneys. The video exists. That's the bottom line. To tell you exactly what happened during these encounters. Officers, according to our policy now, officers shall or should have reasonable articulable suspicion to request the consent, and minus reasonable articulable suspicion, an officer must articulate in writing why the consent was requested and provide documentation as to the process that led up to the request. Those are all additions. As John points out, a retired civilian judge and law professor, Mike Algio, he teaches constitutional policing, coercion, and everything related to consent searches, to include the Fourth Amendment, to our rookies, to our officers during in-service annually, and to our supervisors. We also bring in a third party that is not an officer to teach all aspects of the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment. We also have the PAB and the ACC, who are both completely removed from the police department, where people can file complaints. And since their inception, we have received very few complaints associated with a consent search. And for those very few cases where one has been put in, it should be noted that those independent reviews have found that there were no findings related to an officer abusing anyone's constitutional rights or being coercive. There were 2 minor incidents of technical infractions where the officer did not complete the form that is required in a timely manner. And those instances, the officer received discipline. Additionally, these 2 oversight groups that are tasked, they are tasked with identifying instances and patterns of police misconduct. They have not noticed any incident or any issues related to consent searches. I encourage the community, and I have been asked and encouraged by the community that officers be able to use every tool available and not just reactively investigate crime, but to actually detect and prevent criminal activity before it occurs in order to enhance public safety and community well-being. All of this is being done fairly and equitably. We talk a lot about disparities. It's mentioned since I became an assistant chief almost 4.5 years ago. That there are disparities. I would also point out the disparities in the complaints we receive and where we receive them from, meaning what communities are complaining about crime. Most originate from our densely, highly populated areas, which are also our challenged communities or our equity focus areas. There are noted disparities in our victimization. The majority of our victims of violent crimes are Black or brown. In fact, over 75, I think it's, and maybe Chief Augustine knows this number exactly, but either 75 or up to 80% of our homicide victims in 2024 were of a minority community. There were 3 different surveys that were conducted. None of them were done by the police department, and all 3 showed that an overwhelming number of our community members were happy with the police, wanted more police or more enforcement. And in the most recent survey, concerns that were very high about crime and public safety were no longer at the top of the list. That is due in large part by the work being done by the officers on this department. One thing to note is that consent searches account for an extremely small percentage of the overall number of searches our officers conduct. And those that stem from traffic stops reduce that number even further. We have seen significant reduction in our violent crime across several violent crime categories, all within the last year or 18 months. That's also due in part to the use of consent searches. Every seized or illegally possessed weapon or drugs can be attributed to preventing a violent crime in the future. Probably, and in fact, we have seen more than one crime. These guns are used across the region. Our officers see many of these individuals coming into Montgomery County from Prince George's County, from the District of Columbia, from Virginia, and they don't walk here. They get here in vehicles. We see these guns being used in shootings and homicides. Like I said, not just here in Montgomery County. These guns have been conclusively linked to regional crimes through follow-up investigations, most often involving NIBIN, which is a form of identifying cartridges and spent shell casings from a firearm. Many of these firearms, as John said, are illegally possessed by felons and prohibited persons. Some of the guns we have seen have been outfitted with switches that turn them into fully automatic weapons. It's important for everyone, in my mind, to keep knowing that the consent searches are only one tool that our officers have in their toolbox. I've promised our communities that we will be proactive in fighting crime, not reactive. I have also promised that our officers will remain constitutional. We do not abuse these tools. Removing these tools from the public or from the officers damages public safety and increases the likelihood that this illegal activity will go undetected until it results in violence. We have seen progress over the past years with our violent crime numbers, as I said, and there's much more work to do. Consent searches, when done constitutionally, as done by our officers here in Montgomery County, is a very effective tool in preventing and detecting and deterring crime here in Montgomery County.
All right, thank you so much to each of our panelists. At this time, we will turn to our Q&As. We have a number of questions that were submitted through the web form, and we see that there are a number of questions accumulating in the Q&A box. And so I will read out the questions, and I would ask that you would respond succinctly according to your area of expertise, so that we can get in as many questions as possible. First question: are the new requirements for consent searches being faithfully and consistently followed?
Yeah, I'll let Chief Augustine answer that and provide some insight on how the new process is being implemented and will continue to be looked at moving forward.
Okay.
First, good evening. I look at this in a three-part aspect. We have one aspect, which is training. The second part is operation, and the third part is evaluation and review. Look at the training aspect in this. We started this pilot and program back in November, very quickly. So we immediately put out a training bulletin as well as a function code, which requires is the direction of how officers should do consent searches, what is required by them. Moving into the future, we're going to increase the amount of training references at our academy, not only for our new recruits in the police academy, but also those that come into in-service training. So they have more of an educational aspect on this, since this was pushed out very, very quickly at the end of 2024. The processes that we continue to look and monitor, our policy and plan division looks at the data, sees what data is coming back. If we need to change any of the way we require the officers to report, whether it's the way they put in what the reason for the stop or so on. So we continue to look at that and make improvements into the application. We also monitor at multiple levels, from the first line supervisor to an executive officer who reviews all related to traffic stops to ensure there is compliance. But we also have a lot of external and ways to review it, whether it's through the state's attorney's office, if there was an arrest made, or if a complaint was filed through the Police Accountability and Administrative Charging Committee.
All right, thank you so much, Assistant Chief. Second question, is the consent search app clear and understandable to the driver?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Darren, Chief Frank, Assistant Chief Frank answer that one. He took part in formulating the app that's now used by all of our officers.
Good evening. So it is very clear. I actually pulled it up on my phone just so that I had it ready in case anyone, I don't know if I can show it on the video, but this has been a work in progress. We wanted to move quickly at the chief's direction to get the consent out to go with the change in the function code that required reasonable articulable suspicion. Officers should have reasonable articulable suspicion. And in doing so, what we kind of found is we quickly got a group together to go through the process and come up and work with our professional staff to create this app. And then when we implemented, started in December, we have a fantastic group of officers that are using the tool in addition to executives that are doing their reviews. And we keep finding ways to tweak it and make it better, the entire app. Now, the part that this question applies to is it clear and understandable to the driver? That's been clear since day one. We haven't had an issue there. But when I say we keep adapting the app, we find circumstances or conditions where an officer isn't quite sure what they should enter, and we get feedback and we instantaneously change the app. So I'm going to pull it up real quick. And I don't know if I can share. I know someone told me I can. I'm usually the tech guy, but I am a little bit older. But the app itself, I tell you what, I'm going to do the old fashioned. I just want to show you the screen if I can. It's highlighted in yellow. And this is what the officer, oh, that's terrible. Sorry. There it goes. It's what the officer shows. Let me pull it back here. There we go. So it's highlighted in yellow, and this is shown to the individuals that are being asked for consent. I'm doing my best to focus here. So consent search acknowledgement. I've been advised of my constitutional right not to have a search made of my person. Well, let me get back in focus for the audience here. You know what? I'm just going to read it. You can see it. Search made of my person, vehicle, and or property without consent, without a search warrant first being obtained. I know that I can refuse to consent to this search. Do you acknowledge that you have been provided and understand this information? And the selections are yes, no, and NA. There's some reasons behind NA. And then once you click yes, then it goes to a second highlighted area. And I'm just going to show it to you real quick before I read it. It populated a second area that says consent search agreement. I give consent for the following to be searched, and then you check off what's being searched. So very clear. It can be translated if we need to be. That's one of the improvements we're going to go towards in the future, having it in a different language. But as many of you know, we do have officers that speak multiple languages that help interpret. So this is part of the efficiency, number one, that we're creating for our officers. Number two, collecting excellent data. And number three, making sure that drivers clearly see in front of them what their rights are.
All right, thank you very much. Next question. Are all consent searches being reviewed within 5 days by an executive staff member? And are the reviews turning up any problems?
Nick or Darren, you want to speak to what we've seen so far, but to answer the question about any problems, the detailed amount of information that's included in some of the reports, we're trying to address that. We would like more detail in some of the reports that were being sent up. But other than that, I'll let Nick or Darren speak to what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I'll since I'm still not muted here. So what we're seeing is, yes, executives are reviewing within the 5 days as they're supposed to. They're looking at the body worn camera. They aren't identifying any issues as far as the intent of what we're doing. They're not seeing any coercion on traffic stops. They're not seeing any sleight of hand, if you would. They're seeing the officers. The main part in getting the consent is completely on target. The things that we are finding in the executive staff review is we're finding where a block of information, and the chief spoke to this briefly, a block of information wasn't filled out the way we wanted it, because part of this is being able to report out, right? If I have to go hand search reports at a later date, that's a lot of work to go through to report out on data. We want to make the app as simple as possible to create a back-end database that has all the information right there. So those are the tweaks we're finding that we need to make. And the way we make those tweaks is if it's a question that needs clarified on the presentation of the app, we'll get our professional staff to make that adjustment. If it's a training issue, the beauty of a training bulletin is it can always be adapted. There's one in progress right now, an update of the training bulletin, and we're just about near completion on that. So we'll issue that training bulletin, and that's a living document that you continue to update, and update. So an officer can always use it as a reference.
Very good. Thank you. Next question. Has the revised process resulted in any changes to racial disparities regarding traffic stops in general, as well as consent searches in particular?
Yeah, I mean, we're just now getting into the first couple months of doing this, so I don't know that we have a tremendous amount of data to work off of, but Nick, do you want to speak to any of this?
Well, we're constantly monitoring the data, and I think how frequent consent searches are, this isn't something that an officer is doing every single day. So we need to get enough data to look at it and determine it. So, looking so far since November, there's been under 100 consent searches related to traffic stops. So we need to have a good raw data number to analyze that data, see what districts they're coming from, the population of those districts, and many other things before we can do an analysis of that data.
My
One
follow-up to
thing-
that question is what is the number you would need before you had enough data to do an analysis? You said there's less than 100. What is the number?
Well, I think it's providing a quarterly review or like we do our annually reviews. We'll definitely have reports out just like we do with our use of force reporting or crime reporting, which are done on an annual basis. But once we start getting numbers in, we may be able to do it quarterly. We just don't know the numbers we're going to have as this is so new.
All right, thank you.
One of the things I'll point out when people talk about the disparities in traffic stops is the data that has been referred to call out these disparities, I have said for 5 years now, is flawed. You should not use census data. It doesn't reflect people who are not quite of driving age. It doesn't take into account people that travel in and out of Montgomery County from other places. It doesn't account for people who are beyond. I would assume that we are going to see that once you reach a certain age, you're not going to be asked for a consent search if you're 70 or 80 or 90 years old. I mean, you're not going to find yourself in a position where that's going to occur. Census data is just flawed. We've made a point to say this, and people keep coming back to say, well, the disparities are there as reflected based on census data. I mean, to me, that we should be looking at other things to come up with these numbers.
Can I give one hard example of that? It was I think it was before Chief Jones left. We were looking at a huge community concern relative to car thefts and auto thefts, and in the cases where we were able to identify the offenders, 2/3 of the offenders in carjackings and auto thefts were not Montgomery County residents. So it really the much of the crime, whether it's car thefts, auto thefts, gang-related activity, drugs, these are movable things that cross all geographic boundaries. And I would also indicate that something that's come up with the sizable senior community that we have, that I know that Mr. Katz and I fit into, that sizable senior community, we don't get a lot of our crime coming from the Sidney Katzes of the community. You know, when you're looking at crime data, and you're, to a certain extent, you're really, if you want to, demographically, you want to really be looking at the cohort of the community or the region between 15 and 25. That's a much more meaningful number to look at in terms of what's happening in terms of law enforcement and policing in all of our communities in the metropolitan area.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, because I think it's just by virtue of who's here, you've been getting an approach kind of just from one side here. The census data point, which Chief Yamada and Chief Jones before him have brought up, that is the data we use in any analysis of any agency. It is an acceptable sociological data point that is used to make policy across the world. And so that point is not a valid point. When we're looking at HHS, when we're looking at transportation, when we're looking, we're all using those same data points. So it's a valid data point to look at. And to the point of people coming in and out of the county, for example, in traffic stops, it was the police department's data showed that 75% of traffic stops are of people who are from Montgomery County, roughly. you know, given year might go up or down a point or two. 25% are from out of the county. So if I've asked multiple times, and so let's look at the 75% that are in the county, and do the traffic disparities still exist? They do. And so I think this idea that, you know, because we're saying nothing's wrong, which is kind of what I hear, is we can always do better. There is disparity. There's lived experience. There's people that testify. The fact that no one complains goes through our complaint process, or very few, is not indicative of that. It couldn't be an issue. So I'm happy that we're moving forward, but I just think we need to keep perspective that not every community experiences policing the same way, and that some of the things we have measures to track progress. Because if we're saying that we can't use census data to see if we're doing better, then what are we using? That can't be acceptable. And so we have to have a measure that we can measure against. If the department wants to come up with a different measure, happy to talk about that. But right now, that's the measure we have. And we have to be able to measure progress off of something.
My suggestion to the council has always been, let's find a better way to do it. There has been no suggestions. I don't know that it's up to me to figure out what that is. I'm not a research specialist.
All right, in the interest of time, we will move on. I do look forward to hearing about the progress once we hit the magic number. Number 5, next question. Why does Montgomery County Police Department's policy use the term should rather than must in restricting consent searches absent reasonable and articulable suspicion?
Well, I'll start, and then I'll let my colleagues join in. The simple fact is, if you use the word must, what we have created, or what I have created as the chief for my officers, is a situation where they could do everything legal to a T, as conformed by the law, as deemed appropriate by the state's attorney and the Supreme Court, yet still get reprimanded for it, have something negative placed in their file, and ultimately affect their careers. It just doesn't make sense to me. We've taken it a step further. Instead of just leaving it as, well, you should have reasonable articulable suspicion, and if you don't, so what? That's not what we're saying. If you don't have it, if you lack RAS, then you're required to document the steps and the process that you took in detail as to how you reached and arrived at the decision to ask somebody for consent. It's not a fishing expedition. It's not something that's done randomly or for every driver, as other agencies have done. It's something that's has specific direction for our officers. And that one word, to me, can lead to a finding, a disciplinary finding that is negatively reflected on the officer. We still used body-worn camera review. There's executive layers of review. There's supervisory layers of review. All of these are designed to identify problems that, as I said before, along with the PAB and the ACC, we haven't seen any of these issues arise as of yet. But I'll let Darren and Nick speak maybe a little bit more to this.
I think the chief covered it a good deal, and I want to emphasize again what he's already said. It's the should is a word in there. The direction from the chief has been clear. You will have reasonable articulable suspicion, and if you don't have reasonable articulable suspicion, then you're going to have to explain what the circumstances are in the same action, so that we can confirm that you are within the bounds of the U.S. Constitution. It's a good balance, especially with some of the things we've seen. It leaves a very valuable tool in the hands of officers. Again, the creation of this policy and the creation of the app that we have, as State's Attorney McCarthy said, it gets contraband, it gets guns off the road, out of the hands of prohibited persons, out of the hands of juveniles, people that intend to harm this community. And as the new patrol services chief, I've been to community meetings, spoken with community members, spoken with officers, and we're all in for the safety of Montgomery County. And they want us to be able to make sure that they're as safe as possible with all the tools, and we do it fairly, which this app, I think we're going to see the data in the end demonstrates. And I apologize, I was working on bringing up the app so you guys can see again, it's there in writing for a citizen that is asked for a consent search. You don't have to do this. You do not have to subject yourself. You can walk away. So I'm going to continue to work on that in case anyone else has any, in case Chief Augustine has anything, or you want to move on to the next question.
Could I just make one more point? The standard constitutionally for a consent search, it has to be free and voluntary, not the result of coercion. So the fact that within this policy, the officers now have a directive that they should have reasonable articulable suspicion to even request a consent search, that is substantially above and beyond what is constitutionally required. So I think some of that could get lost on some of our listeners if they'd understand this is a substantially higher standard that we are holding the officers in Montgomery County to, beyond what would be constitutionally required based on, 200 years of constitutional history relative to search and seizure.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in on this question as well, I think, again, the whole point here is to have a higher standard than the constitutional standard. That's the whole point of the bills that I introduced in the policy, which is a good thing. I think the question was, why is it should versus must? You heard some perspectives from the chief, which was very clear that he in the weighing, he weighed an officer's potential, disciplinary record and the ability for them to do their job against the requirement. And we had this discussion at the committee. And I think, reasonable people can disagree there on what's the appropriate weight. I'm of the view of that if we're saying you got to do it, you should have to do it. And if you don't do it, there should be consequences. I think in this case, the way we'll have to see how it functionally operates. The chief, if you don't do it properly, it sounds like it would be, there wouldn't really be a mechanism for discipline. It would be more like, hey, you got to do this better next time or something, more of a so that's something that I think, again, you can disagree of what approach to take. But, my view is that if you're saying it should be done and it must be done, that there should be some consequence for the action of not having it done. But I do think it is progress, to everyone's previous point, that we're setting the expectation that it be done. The question is, if it's not, what's the remedy? And I think that's something we'll have to look at over time.
Can I jump in? And I appreciate what everyone is saying. I sincerely do. And but I did what everybody should do, and I Googled what is the difference between should and must. And this is one of the statements that it came up with. It says the word should is used for actions / responsibilities / duties that what one would think is best for the concerned subject. And the word must is used for actions, responsibilities, and duties that are considered compulsory and necessary. And to everyone's point, we're going to review this. We're going to find out what is and what isn't working. But candidly, I believe it's almost somewhere in between the two. I don't believe you should have to have something that's compulsory, but I also believe you have to have something that says we're going to keep people safe. So this conversation obviously is going to be a continuing, but I do appreciate the conversation.
I do want to add one thing that's lost in this is the chief of police. I understand the wording there is should, and the chief made a very concentrated decision on that. But the chief of police, when this is reviewed, when executives review this, when the supervisors review this, and we find misconduct, something that's not consistent with his direction, that we find that there was coercion or anything else, there's nothing that prevents the chief of police from filing a complaint. So I think it's not I think we're not understanding what the chief of police has the ability to do and what he's committed to in saying that everyone should have reasonable articulable suspicion and must explain themselves if they don't, because he's still ultimately going to be the person that makes a decision on whether or not there is a violation.
Thank you all for your responses. Next question. What specific area, if any, does MCPD provide to officers to determine when they should or should not conduct a consent search?
So I'll start, and again, I'll turn this over to some of my colleagues, but, you know, and John McCarthy even can speak to some of this, but probable cause, reasonable articulable suspicion, all those things there's nothing finite about it. Each instance where an officer is trying to conduct an investigation, a traffic stop, has a physical encounter with somebody on the street, we use building blocks. And each one of those blocks contributes to what I am going, as an officer, what I am going to do next, whether it's asking you some more questions, whether it's calling another officer to the scene, all these things. There are intangibles involved. There's nothing finite. I don't think I can give anyone any specific 1, 2, 3 is reasonable articulable suspicion. And when you get to 4, that's probable cause, because that might not be the case. It might be the case this time, but not the next time. The training we offer is given at the academy during in-service to our executives. It's on a continuous basis. How to do these things constitutionally, how to conduct interviews, what questions to ask, how to do follow-ups, all those things. And they all play a role in an officer's training and experience to determine when or when not to ask for consent, or when not to ask somebody to step out of their vehicle, or when not to ask somebody, show me your hands. You know, it varies between, for every single instance. John, I don't know if you want to chime in legally here, or
Look,
Dave, what you've seen in 3D.
Well, look, I just think it's some of it is just a myriad kinds of situations that can occur during human interactions, and based on your training and your experience, different things cue to you, or you see things. But again, look, I think what Chief, I think what you said captures what I would just be repeating. But again, it's a continuum, and it's not a math problem. 1 + 1 = 2. In a lot of these instances, they're not absolutes here. They're matters of human experience that go into an officer making a decision to take a particular course of action, and you have to justify it. Because if you can't justify it to a judge, whether it's a pat down or a full-blown search, or are you asking somebody to get out of their car, you're going to lose the evidence. So, I mean, there is a final arbiter on all of this. And that's not what we're talking about. But ultimately, judges make rulings all the time as to whether or not the actions of the police officer were reasonable under circumstances and facts. They must articulate in court or in a document to a judicial officer.
And I'll ask Assistant Chief McBain to comment here as the former commander in 3D, where a lot of this activity goes on. There's a heightened level of enforcement, especially in the CBD area. His folks on DCAT, CBD, and his SAT team are extremely efficient in how they pursue criminal and detect criminal activity. The training they receive, all those things, and direction from Chief McBain as to what he gave them while he was in 3D. So, Dave.
Yeah, so Chief, you kind of alluded to that a little bit of this in your opening statements. You know, a lot of our communities down in Silver Spring were asking for heightened police presence based on crime, and so a lot of times, you know, as a district commander, I would use the resources that were available to me that were you know, our DCAT teams and our special assignment teams, who not only have additional training, but are sent into neighborhoods specifically to suppress crime. And I know that oftentimes people don't like to kind of say that, but we do traffic stops for traffic safety, but we also have a component where we use the traffic stop to make our neighborhoods safer. The interesting thing is, I can't tell you how many body-worn camera, videos that I reviewed as a commander over the 3 years I was down in Silver Spring. But there were times when, some of these teams knew, had that feeling that there was either drugs or a gun in a car, but they had not reached that level of the stop where they felt they could legally get into the vehicle or remove the person and search the vehicle. And even when they asked for consent and were denied, they ultimately pulled back and didn't search and would let these individuals leave. I mean, there's examples out there. So, I know we've discussed that we haven't got a lot of examples right now, but I think the longer we run this program, the more examples we're going to see where officers understand where they're on strong footing and where they're not, and they'll make those decisions. Just one final thing that I would say, because for several years now we've been talking about this OLO report with the with traffic stop data, and I usually don't say anything unless somebody else brings this up, but that report reflects that uses a number of 18% for the population of African Americans in the community. But when you break down, when you look at Silver Spring, it's simply just not the fact. So to use the census data, the numbers that they were using in that report, that doesn't account for like White Oak being 53% African American, or Burtonsville being 52% African American, or downtown Silver Spring being 30% African American. So the disparities on the traffic stops, I think, are it's not that cut and dry, and that's why I think we have a problem with the census data. So the reality is that we look at our officers to act in a professional manner. We utilize the body worn cameras, and like I said, as a commander, I would almost devote entire days at looking at body worn cameras of specific calls, to include numerous traffic stops where arrests were made or not made. The officers were doing the job properly.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to the next question. How does MCPD ensure accountability when the policy lacks clear, enforceable language? And how will officers and the public be able to determine whether a violation has occurred?
So I'll start. The accountability, a good thing is that it just doesn't fall just internally on me or the assistant chiefs in a review. You have, as we pointed out, the ACC and the PAB, who are independent. They get complaints for any interaction with the public that may come across. So there's accountability there. We also have random review that is done internally. And during the course of those reviews, we have identified whether it be a training issue, whether it be a policy misstep, or whether it be something that needed to be forwarded to the PAB or the ACC. We have done that internally. Accountability is a huge priority for me. There's probably nothing that's more important. And Darren spent the last 4 years overseeing management services, which covers a lot of what I just spoke about. So I'll let him speak to add any further comments. Maybe not.
No, I am sorry, Chief.
Oh.
Still, I'm obsessed now. I want to show this app on the screen. I'm like jumping from thing to thing to figure out that. Well, first of all, everything you said is right on target for what we go through on the policy, and we're very thorough in it. The people that review it, we have a fantastic deputy director of our policy and planning division that takes feedback all the time and how we can change things. We have reached out on other items for feedback, and I mean this group here. We've met with the PAB. We've met with a number of different groups to listen to feedback and see how we can tweak things. So we have a very, I would say, I would call it a learning organization, which is what you want in your police department. Really, I can't say much more than what the chief said.
All right, thank you. Although these questions were independently submitted, number 8 is pretty close to number 4. Does the MCPD collect and publicly report data on consent searches, including racial and demographic breakdowns, to assess potential bias in their application? I'm especially interested in hearing about the public report piece.
Yeah, so I
Jacobs.
mean, I'll start. I'll let AC Augustine chime in at the end, but the bottom line answer is yes, and we've taken additional steps to make the reporting better. Through the app that we're using, we'll be able to determine where the consent searches are being requested, who's requesting them. Is it one officer? Is there one officer that's demonstrating a problem or a bias of some sort? All these things we'll be able to track and report out on much better now that we have this system in place. And again, I'll let Nick sort of speak to what we might potentially see in the future.
Thank you, Chief. And just one thing I wanted to also bring clear here. When I mentioned approximately 100 consent searches, we have to look at that. That's just not traffic stops. That would include our detectives going to someone's house, asking for consent to search their house, or asking for a DNA sample from a suspect, or if they're on the scene of a fentanyl overdose, asking for consent to search the victim's phone. So we have to look at that too. So it's a significantly less number that we have. I'd probably say around half are traffic stop related, but we're still looking at that and looking at the numbers. So it's just something to keep in perspective there at that. So once we do have the data, we are looking at each entry that's coming in and seeing how the officers are filling it out and validating the entry. There was free text area where officers can type something in. We're looking at that to see how that corresponds. But as the chief said, we do plan to have this data pushed out either quarterly and definitely annually, as well as reporting to the County Council and the Public Safety Committee when they do have briefings on these topics.
Very good. Thank you. Next question, and we just have 3 more questions of the submitted questions. What are the advantages police consent searches provide for the safety of the residents of Montgomery County? So please share your brochure information.
Yeah, I'll let Commander McBain. He does a great job at explaining the problems he saw specifically in Silver Spring, and even more specifically in downtown Silver Spring, the reductions in crime that he was able to put forth due to some concerted efforts down there. Not only by his patrol officers, but by his CBD and DCAT and SAT teams. Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think the question was, what do the consent search, how does it make, I guess, knock down crime?
They provide for the safety of residents of Montgomery County.
Yeah. So, when we're out conducting traffic stops in downtown Silver Spring, or really any neighborhood that we have an increase in crime, our job is to keep the community safe. And so when these officers are out doing their job and they see things, so we're just assuming that I think there's an assumption that that officers are just picking out random cars and stopping them. And maybe that does occur every now and then, but the vast majority of these traffic stops are because the officer has seen something that causes them to wonder, right? And quite frankly, that's our job. If we don't want officers sitting in the police station and responding to incidents like firefighters, right? We're supposed to be proactively in the community in order to hold the community, to keep the community safe. And when we see things where that don't make sense, and we develop the ability to pull over a car, and while we're conducting our business with the traffic stop, the officers again, and Chief Yamada had alluded to this, they're building blocks that are being developed, or red flags that are seen, that calls the officer to say something is not right here.
Just
Something
don't
seems
order
amiss.
a lot so that we have.
And then they ask for consent. Well, quite frankly, if we didn't do that, I think we would be missing tons of guns. I mean, look, if we miss drugs, if we miss dope, it's not that big a deal. But to allow, to miss an opportunity to develop the ability to ask for consent and to get into that car and to remove a gun is extremely rewarding, and it clearly makes our community safer. There were areas in Silver Spring where I infused it with police officers to kind of knock down crime, and the amount of guns that we started seizing during traffic stops, and again, not just from consent, but through Terry searches, through search incident to arrest. There's a whole bunch of things, but the officers are constantly building on the stop, and so to kind of abandon our abilities to try to get into cars would clearly make our neighborhoods more unsafe.
All right, thank you. Susan, number 10 seems fairly objective, but I'm going to read it out. But if it's something that we can answer later on the ACP website in the interest of time, that might be profitable for us. The question is, what changes did the MCPD's consent search policy of December 2nd, 2024 make to the consent search policy that existed prior to that date? Would we be able to give a list of bullet points or post a list of bullet points of changes, Susan?
Sure, I can follow up with the police department and get that in written form, and we will post, just to let everybody know that we will post, if we can't get to your questions tonight, we will follow up with panelists and we will post the answers on the Advisory Commission for Policing's website.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. All right. Last question of the pre-submitted questions. Does Montgomery County consider national crime statistics when making decisions about the investigative tools available to the Montgomery County Police Department? Specifically, has Montgomery County considered statistics about the percentage of arrests that are made in part by the use of license plates readers, or the percentage of arrests that follow from mundane traffic stops?
Darren, I'm going to defer to you here. Is that one question, or is that like 17 wrapped up in one? But I'll let Darren speak to some of this.
Maybe you can answer the part after specifically, which says, has Montgomery County considered statistics about the percentage of arrests that are made in part by the use of license plate readers, or the percentage of arrests that follow from mundane traffic stops?
I would say, in the way that that's written, there's an assumption written in there somewhere. I guess I would say this: Montgomery County has been a national leader in addressing crimes through innovation, through forward-thinking policy, through technology. So we consider all those things. We consider what is going around, what is happening nationally, because generally what we see, what's happening nationally, even in the big cities, affects us here in Montgomery County. And that's why it's one of the reasons we're part of the Major City Chiefs of Police, because we do trend along with them. So for example, when we saw auto thefts go out of control. And they're still very high, not where we want them, because of a TikTok craze, and that's happened nationally. We looked at what everyone had done with that. How can we combat these thefts? In that particular instance, license plate readers became important, and that's why, and requests certainly from the Silver Spring district and all the districts where we were getting ravaged with auto thefts, the community was asking us to do something. So we deployed license plate readers through our Axon fleet system. We are getting more reads than ever. I mean, thousands upon thousands of reads, so that we can disrupt auto thefts by stopping people that have stolen cars. In addition to that, we looked at what tools we had, to include doing multiple drive-in events where Kia representatives came and applied updates to vehicles so that those vehicles couldn't be stolen. And we also communicated a great deal by Nextdoor. So that's one example of us looking at nationally what people do and what we have done locally on that. Mundane traffic stops. Well, I'm going to tell you that every traffic stop that an officer makes is not mundane. It's one of the riskiest acts that a police officer can take. And they're doing that to ensure, number one, we gain ground in our Vision Zero program. I'm sure Assistant Chief McBain can talk a great deal about the number of people that are killed on our roadways from drunk drivers or distracted drivers or speeding drivers. So in addition to that, now we have, and we're looking forward to producing more numbers. We have testified previously, I apologize, I don't have them in front of me, about the number of guns that are taken out of cars during traffic stops. It's absolutely unacceptable. There's a weapon in a vehicle being transported around, which is illegal to begin with. And then again, as Chief Yamada pointed out, we find them in the hands of prohibited persons. We find them in the hands of juveniles. We find them in the hands of people that have come to Montgomery County to rob, to assault, and to cause mayhem. So we look at all the tools we can, and consent search is one of those that we apply to those situations so that we can disrupt this kind of activity. So that's a little bit of it. We can go into I mean, I know Chief Yamada and Assistant Chief McBain are very proud of the drones as first responder. Again, another forward-facing technology tool that we use to deal with national crime statistics that ultimately play out here in Montgomery County.
And I'll add one thing. I'm going to let Chief McBain address this for 30 seconds maybe, but we were just asked by Assistant or the Chief Administrative Officer Madalino and the CE himself to increase the number of LPRs that relay information to officers, live stream officers information on stolen plates and things like that, because it is such an effective tool, especially in downtown Silver Spring and in Bethesda and in Wheaton. Dave, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we're just building on something that we've been doing for probably the last several years. But I think when in Silver Spring, we were the first to put up a permanent LPR that we stationed on the District of Columbia jurisdictional line, kind of flagging vehicles that were coming out of DC into downtown Silver Spring, because there was such an alarming number of stolen vehicles and felonious vehicles coming into downtown. The county executive in one of our most recent meetings has asked that we put these LPR systems around the exit ramps and entrance ramps of the Beltway, because oftentimes Montgomery County sees a lot of crime that comes off the Beltway from Prince George's County and from DC. And the hopes there is that with the LPR systems in strategic locations based on some data, that we can get hits on stolen vehicles, because oftentimes the stolen vehicles coming into Montgomery County to commit crime. So we're working on a plan to start moving those LPR systems into place. And again, a lot of it is based on data where we're going to put these camera systems, but also the close proximity to the Beltway.
All right, thank you very much. Before we move on to our live questions, I do have a follow-up questions from two of my colleagues on the ACP in the live chat. Assistant Chief Augustine, I think this is with regards to my follow-up question of what is the number required in order to analyze the data. Terry asks, does that include the number who declined and approved to be searched? Is that right? Terry, do you want to say more?
Yeah, I think he pretty much answered it before, but does that include the declined also?
Yes, it does. And I don't have the specific numbers of how many were declined and how many were accepted. But like I again said, it's more than just traffic stops. And that's why we really need to look at that data before we put it out there and make sure it's accurate and giving you the right information.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks
then my colleague, Mr. John Stevenson, I think on the same matter, asks, how do we fix this concern with the data that the chief has recognized as the data evaluation an outdated process? And an additional question, have we taken a look at other cities on how they acquire data?
So I'll start. I have a report and I can share it with Susan and she can share it with everybody else. It's from the National Policing Institute on estimating racial bias in traffic stops. As I told Council Member Jawando, Council Vice President Jawando, I've said it repeatedly for the 5 years. I don't have the answer. I don't know what the right formula is to come up with a better data set, if you will, instead of census. I'm not claiming to be a research analyst or a specialist in any way. I'm open to whatever. And I've asked the council to come up with ideas. And in fact, others have asked the council to come up with other alternatives and instead of using census data. But I mean, again, it's just my opinion. I see many gaps. I don't think it's the right way to do it. Whether it's used in other things or not, I don't dispute that. But in this particular arena, I don't think it's a valid way to conduct this. And I'm not the only one. So.
And just to follow up on that, Chief, and some research experts say when you're looking at traffic stop data, the only way to get correct information is if you do a sampling of your population that you're looking at, your driving population. So for instance, that would be at Georgia Avenue and Randolph Road at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, someone out there looking and say, okay, what's the race of that person that's driving? Actually getting a sample of the community that you're policing that's actually out there driving around. And you need to do that in multiple locations for it to be accurate. And then put that data from your traffic stops in those areas where you have the sampling of the population. So it'd be a very time-consuming process to do, but there is that option out there to either get a research company to come in and do that type of work and analyze that, or look to see how we can get that type of data and do a true comparison.
Can I add something to this conversation?
Yes.
I think it's vital because if we don't have the correct data, we're making decisions based on false information. And I think that's the big concern with certain communities, because now there's different perceptions of communities that it's not solid. I'm trying to find language for this, and I think I'm very concerned with that. With the chief, if the data is not correct, what decisions are being made to serve the communities properly, I don't think we're getting the best service if we don't have good data. And how are we getting a census? Are people being truthful in a sense?
Well, another thing to keep in mind, sir, too, and it just came to my mind, and Nick can talk to this. He spent time in crew and he works with ETICS a lot. Maryland State Police controls a lot of our data that's included in traffic stops, and race is not one of them. It's governed by MSP, Maryland State Police. I have nothing to do with it. I have no say in it. But race is not something that's covered through ETICS data, and it's not something that MSP is interested in doing. Nick, am I wrong in saying that?
That's correct. Yeah, and we've talked about this before with Maryland State Police, and they would have to change the entire system throughout the state of Maryland, which they're not looking to do.
All right.
For those that don't know, ETICS is the system in which we put driver information when they're stopped for a violation or whatever reason. That's the computer system that we input information into.
Thank you. All right. So let's go to our live questions. There are a lot of comments in the live Q&A, so we're only going to address questions that were asked. All right. First question. It's good that reviewing body camera footage for consent searches is mandatory, but who reviews it?
So Darren, unless I'm wrong, not only does, let's say if it's Officer Bellamy, me as your sergeant, I would review it. Then it would go up to Lieutenant Augustine, Captain Frank, and Assistant Chief McBain, and on up the line. So there's multiple layers of review. There's also the possibility that it could come under review through a random review through our PAD division.
Okay. Next question. If consent searches are voluntary, what prevents a criminal from denying the search and moving on with contraband? Conversely, why do you think innocent people willingly consent to searches despite knowing they're innocent? That's two very good questions, I think. So maybe one at a time.
Well, I mean, the first one is if somebody, and we've seen examples of this, and I think Assistant Chief McBain spoke to it, but during our review, we've seen instances, multiple, where officers have requested consent, either on a traffic stop or on a call for service, and either a homeowner, a vehicle operator, or whoever says, no, you can't search me. The officers walk away. No means no. And that's my direction to our officers. And it's reinforced by every assistant chief and all of our executive staff. So yeah, do people walk away or drive away or keep contraband in their house and they come under no scrutiny from law enforcement? Absolutely. It happens all the time. In fact, there was one case in particular, it was disturbing to me as a parent. We had a student in Montgomery County make a threat at a school, either to shoot up a school or something social media. He might have posted a picture of a gun online. We went to the house to speak with the parents. We asked the parents for consent. We were denied. We turned around and walked away. Now, I would imagine that the community, had that child had access to a weapon and gone to school the next day and actually shot somebody, they would have said, hey, you were at the house last night. Why didn't you do anything? We did everything that we could do. We took no as no, and we walked away. What was the second part? You had part two.
Yes. Conversely, why do you think innocent people willingly consent to searches despite knowing they're innocent?
So yeah, when I spent a lot of time in narcotics, as did Assistant Chief McBain, and we encountered people all the time. We would ask for consent. And they would say, yeah, please search me. Oftentimes we wouldn't even have to ask. The subject would just look at us and go, can you just search me and get this over with? Do you want me to get out of the car? I'll give you access. You can search whatever you want, just so they can get out of there and go about their business. So it happens all the time.
Okay. All right, then thank you. Next question. And I think this one is, so the questions are coming in actively now, so I'm trying to keep track. The chief mentioned being proactive about policing. How do police determine who to police proactively? And how is that reflected in the consent search practice?
Well, I mean, I'll let AC McBain speak to this. He's the most recent district commander we had, but we're data driven in everything that we do, whether it's traffic enforcement or criminal enforcement. So if a certain community complains and they call the district commander and say, hey, we just had 4 of our cars broken into, that district commander will then take his resources that are available, whether it be SAT, CBD, an overtime detail or whatever, and flood that neighborhood. And I think you heard Chief McBain speak to this before, and I'll let him elaborate if he can.
Yeah, so any commander in the county would be a fool not to look at data and not to see where he or she is having crime spikes, whether it be shootings, violent crime, whether it be burglaries, or other events, and then also during the time of day and time of night, and that's how you would deploy your resources. But basically, you would follow the data, and and you would challenge your officers to when you see spikes in certain crimes, the goal is to knock those crimes down. And so we might stay in an area for a week, we might stay in an area for a month, but we chase the data, and we try to get the crime under control.
And in fact, to Chief McBain's credit, while he was a commander, he came up with an app for his officers because he would attend community meetings and the community would say, we never see any of your officers here. We have all these problems. Why aren't you here all the time? And Dave developed an app on the phone for the officer. They could log in the date, the time, the location they were. And at a community meeting, Dave could turn back to that app and say, nope, in fact, I had 10 officers spend 37 hours in your neighborhood over the last month. And it was very helpful.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question for clarity, State's Attorney McCarthy, that is pivoted to you. The question is, did I hear John McCarthy say that this change to the consent search policy will lead to fewer guns being confiscated?
I think that's an absolutely inescapable result of this policy. I mean, I think that's a common sense conclusion because of the sheer number of guns that we did in fact remove, that we take out of cars. So look, obviously I can't foresee the future, but the documented past leads me to that inescapable conclusion that there will be guns that I think any reasonable person would want off the streets that will not be removed from the streets.
And to clarify, I think we're all saying the more restrictions that are added, the more tools that are taken away or further restricted from the officers, that will lead to an increased number of guns, drugs, crime.
All right. Give me just a second. I'm going to the next question. I'm filtering through the comments.
And I'm going to have to jump off here before too long.
All right, we are certainly winding down. Okay. Why can't the county just follow the Constitution? Why burden officers with data collection? Don't they already have enough to do? There's a shortage of officers, and getting officers off of the side of the road as quickly as possible would seem safer for officers and drivers who have been stopped.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a question for me or if that's a question for why these bills are trying to be pushed through. But I can appreciate that. And yeah, I'm trying to be conscious of the community concerns as the chief, and also trying to provide my officers with to be placed in an environment where they feel like they're in a position to win and not lose. So I'm trying to strike a balance. I don't want this to be Mark Yamada's police department. I want input from the community. I have always accepted that. My predecessors have accepted that. I will continue to take input from the community. But ultimately, if a law is passed or if some sort of legislation is passed, then I'm handcuffed. I have to do whatever it is I'm told to do.
All right. So most of the rest of this is comments. And so to any questions that were objective, the answers will be posted to the ACP website. We want to say thank you to all of our panelists for your time and sharing your expertise. Thank you to the officers who risk your lives to keep the community safe. Thank you to my colleagues who also dedicate your time on this particular critical project, and a special thanks to Susan and Logan and Lucia for your work in the background. And with that, I'm echoing the sentiments of my colleague, Francisco Gonzalez, who's always so thoughtful. And so thank you once again. And, you know, we all want to live in peace and safety. And so we need to continue to have these conversations and to work together to make our county as safe as we can for our children, our seniors, our neighbors, and ourselves. So again, thank you for your time. I want to remind you that time is the most precious commodity that we have. You can make more money, you can buy another home, you can buy another car, but once you spend time, you'll never get it back. So thank you again for your time. Everyone, have a good night, and we look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care. Good night.
Take care.